The rancher came for a rifle, that's all. Sun was just dragging its belly over the mountains when his boots hit the porch boards of Dobbs' outfitting and supply, and the only thing he expected to find behind the door was the usual: walnut-stocked Winchesters, overpriced cartridges, maybe a bottle of Thompson's liniment if the old bastard still carried it. He stepped inside, ducking under the faded elk rack nailed over the doorframe. Dust motes stirred in the early light. The place was quiet, too quiet for a Friday. The bell above the door had clattered just fine, but no one answered from the back room. No stove lit, no pipe smoke hanging, no Dobbs. The rancher stood for a moment, hat still in hand, taking it in. The shop felt deserted, yet nothing was out of place. A half-finished account book lay open at the counter, ink still wet. Behind the glass, the rifles lined up neat, their barrels polished, their tags dangling by string like game carcasses waiting to be cleaned. He called once, Dobbs, but got nothing back. The rancher wasn't a man to pry, but he also wasn't a man who liked wrong silences. He moved behind the counter, boots quiet on worn pine, and turned toward the narrow door marked gear. That's where Dobbs kept his spare tack, rope, lanterns, and what was left of the good guns. It wasn't locked. When he opened it, the stink hit first. Metallic, wrong, the kind of smell you didn't forget once you'd been to war. Then he saw her. She was crumpled on the floor beside a stack of bridles, arms tied behind her back with braided lead line. Dried blood had matted her dark hair to her scalp. Her dress, once white or maybe pale yellow, was ripped across the bodice, dirt ground at the knees. One of her eyes was swollen shut, the other tracked him like an animal half-cornered. The rancher didn't speak. He stepped inside, crouched low. Her lips moved, words he couldn't catch. Her mouth was cracked, crusted in blood. He looked at the bindings, tight, cutting into the flesh. Rope burns, bruising on her ribs, wrists, face. Her breathing was shallow, but she was breathing. He put a hand to her shoulder, gentle as he could. "Who did this to you?" She winced but didn't look away. "Dobbs," he asked low. "Where is he?" Her jaw flexed like she meant to speak, but something behind her eyes shuddered. Instead, she twisted once, painful, and angled her chin to the far wall behind the bridles. There was something under the horse blankets, a shape. The rancher stood, pulled them back, and found the rest of the story written in blood. Dobbs lay face down, arms twisted underneath. A black hole just beneath his left ear, shot execution style. Flies had already found him. The rancher stood still. Then he turned to the girl, not woman, not really, maybe 19, maybe younger if you scrubbed the dirt and blood off her face. Her lips moved again, one word this time. "Help." He didn't ask any more questions. He cut the bindings, lifted her in both arms. She cried out, ribs likely cracked, and carried her out into the rising sun. They were a mile out before she passed out. He laid her in the back of the buckboard, tucked canvas around her shoulders, and kept riding. There was a doctor in Calden Springs, 4 miles east, if the damn old mule held out. He didn't let himself look back at the outfitter's shop. He knew what he'd find: blood, rope, silence. What he didn't know was who she was, or why she'd been left alive. Dr. Halford took her in. He was a hard man, mostly bones and suspicion, but he didn't hesitate. The rancher waited outside, pacing beside his wagon until the door opened again. Halford stood on the threshold, arms crossed, face pinched. "She'll live," he said, "but she's a long road ahead." "What was done to her?" Halford's jaw twitched. She was beaten, starved, wrist fractures, cracked ribs. She'd been tied up for days, maybe more. There's branding on her thigh. Someone marked her like livestock. Burned a double M sigil into the skin. That mean anything to you? The rancher's breath stilled. The double M. "Yeah," he said, "it means something." The McCraw brothers, Malden and Mitch, bastards who ran a cattle outfit south of the old Union tracks near Brush Hollow. Everyone knew they dealt in rustling, bribes, and whispers worse than that. No one had ever proved it, and no one had crossed them and lived long after. "What about Dobbs?" Halford asked. "Dead," said the rancher. Halford spat into the dust. "Then the girl's lucky, real lucky." The rancher didn't answer. He was thinking about the look in her one good eye, the way she'd stared at him, not grateful, not afraid, but full of something else. Recognition. As if she'd been waiting for someone, not to rescue her, but to know what she'd do next. She didn't speak for days. Halford kept her under morphine for the worst of it, but even when she was awake, she said nothing. Only watched, listened, tracked every sound like a wolf pup in unfamiliar woods. The rancher came daily. He didn't ask questions, just brought water, peeled apples, sat near the bed without touching. On the fourth day, she whispered one word. "Juniper." He looked up. "Your name." A nod. "You want to tell me what happened?" Her jaw clenched. She stared at the wall. "No." He nodded like that was enough. "All right." But that night he rode out, past the edge of Calden Springs, into the hills where his land met the McCraw Range. He stood above the arroyos and watched the lights of their bunkhouse far below. 4 riders moved near the cattle pens. One of them laughed, the sound carrying like a crow call in the wind. The rancher stood there until the moon rose. Then he turned back toward town. He wasn't the only one watching. Juniper hadn't slept. She lay still on the cot in the dark and listened to the night air shift when he returned, the way his boots fell heavier than usual on the porch, the scrape of the doorframe as he entered the dock's side room. She remembered that sound. It was the last thing she heard before they dragged her into Dobbs's gear closet. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She waited, silent, planning. Because she remembered more than just the door. She remembered names, voices, a map of who'd held her down. And she remembered the rancher. Not from the shop, but from years ago. Back when she had another name, back when she had a brother. And someone had carved a brand into his chest, too. Juniper got her strength back slower than she wanted. She hated the way her hands shook when she tried to button her own blouse, how her legs trembled after standing for more than a minute. Halford offered a cane. She refused it. The rancher said nothing, just helped her outside on the 6th morning when she asked to see the sun. She squinted up at the hard blue sky like it was a dare. The town moved around her as if she weren't there, wagons rolling, boys shouting near the smithy, women bartering at market stalls. No one looked too long. No one asked who she was or where she'd come from. Calden Springs had seen girls with bruised faces before. It had learned not to ask. The rancher brought her back to the boarding house near the livery. It was quiet, sun-bleached, run by a woman with no interest in small talk. Juniper liked that. The rancher paid for a month up front, said nothing about it. "You got a name?" she asked him on the porch. He paused, hand on his hat brim. "Calder," he said. "Tomas Calder." She nodded once, slow. That name rang in her like a bell struck underwater, familiar but not yet clear. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He didn't answer, just tipped his hat and stepped off the porch. Juniper counted coins at night. She had $11 in change tucked into the hem of her dress, missed by whoever stripped her clean before the gear closet. Hidden pocket, sewn in by her brother when they still ran jobs together, small-time scams and saddle tricks, nothing violent. Not till the day they hit McCraw territory by mistake. Not till her brother wound up a warning nailed to a pine tree. She remembered Mitch McCraw's eyes, pale like milk left out too long. Malden's laugh, rough and wet, the kind that followed you into sleep. She remembered the third man's voice, calm, quiet, wrong. She never saw his face, just his boots when he stepped on her hair and whispered into her ear that she'd be found in pieces. that no one would even look. He was wrong. Calder had found her. But he hadn't just found her. He'd known who the McCraws were, knew the brand. That meant something. Meant maybe he'd had cause once, or maybe he was smart enough to listen to stories other men ignored. Juniper didn't trust him, but she didn't distrust him either. She just didn't think he was here for no reason. The first name she wrote in her notebook was Dobbs. She owed him that much. He tried to help her, paid for it with his life. The second name was Malden McCraw. Not Mitch Malden. Because Malden was the one who gave the orders. Mitch was just the hand that held the blade. She'd seen Malden once in town years ago. He'd come in with 2 deputies and a smile too wide for his face. They drank free, bought women who didn't want buying. No one said a word. Because everyone knew the McCraw Range controlled the water lines, the back trails, the freight contracts. But that didn't mean they couldn't blade. She waited a week, ate boiled potatoes, bathed in cold water, stitched the split hem of a brown skirt someone left behind in a drawer. She practiced walking the room without faltering. By the 8th day, she made it all the way to the saloon by herself. Not to drink, just to listen. She sat in the corner with a tin cup and pretended to be invisible. Men talked loud when they thought no one important was listening. She heard about the cattle drive west of Quartz Ridge, heard about a boy thrown from a gelding and split his head like a melon, heard about a new marshal riding down from Durston Flats. And she heard about Calder. He's been poking around the old claim roads, one man muttered into his whiskey, looking for something. Not gold, said another, maybe ghosts. They laughed, Juniper didn't. That night she walked to Calder's place. He lived in a split-log shack up on the ridge above town, near the aspen grove. No neighbors, just the sound of wind in trees that never quite stopped whispering. He answered the door like he'd been expecting her. "You want something," he said. "I want names." He stepped aside. Inside, the place was cleaner than she thought it'd be. No woman's touch, but careful, rifle over the hearth. Canteen refilled, floor swept. He poured her coffee without asking. She took it. "They took my brother," she said. "Year and a half ago, strung him up like a scarecrow, said he was rustling. He was. We were running a rigged poker game through the bunkhouses. Didn't know who owned the range." "McCraws." She nodded. I came back, quiet, stayed low, waited, tried to figure who gave the order, got close to Dobbs. He was kind. Said he'd help me get out to Durston, find someone who'd testify, but someone tipped them off. They came the night before we were supposed to ride. Calder was quiet. "Why'd you go back to their land?" he asked. "I wanted to see the house, Malden's place, just once, so I'd know where to go when I came back with fire." He let out a breath through his nose. "I went there once too," he said. Juniper looked up. "They killed my wife," Calder said. "Years back, claimed she'd stolen from their supply wagons. She hadn't. She'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. That's all it takes." Juniper's jaw tightened. "You got names?" she asked. He nodded, walked to the hearth, pulled a ledger from beneath the floorboards. Inside were columns, names, crosses, tally marks, notes, handwriting as sharp and angry as a scar. "They use 3 men to do the worst of it," Calder said. "Malden gives the orders. Mitch does the gut work. The third is harder, no name, just goes by Cobb. Used to ride with Confederates down in Arkansas, real quiet, likes knives." "That's the one who whispered to me," Juniper said. "Didn't see his face, just smelled molasses on his breath." Calder flipped through the book. "Then this is him." He turned the page. There was a sketch, rough but clear. A face partly in shadow, beneath it one line. "Cobb, mule thief, knife hand, known to gut women. Last seen near Timberline Creek." Juniper stared. "How many names you got in that book?" she asked. "Too many," Calder said. "Too many crosses." "What's your plan?" He looked at her then, not like a wounded man, not like a rancher. "Like a soldier. I was waiting for the right time." Juniper nodded. "Well," she said, "I'm ready now." Calder didn't smile, but he reached for the rifle leaning in the corner and began to check the sight. The sun dropped low over the ridge, and the wind through the trees began to hum. It wasn't a hymn. It was something older. They left before dawn, no words, no breakfast, just the creak of saddle leather and the rustle of canvas-wrapped rifles. Juniper rode a bay gelding Calder had broken himself, calm and sure-footed on loose shale. He offered her his spare Henry repeater. She slung it across her back without comment. The plan wasn't revenge. Not yet, it was reconnaissance. The macaw spread was too big to burn down with one match. They had 40 men scattered across 3 bunkhouses, plus 2 enforcers on payroll and another dozen sharehands who didn't ask questions so long as their coin came on time. Malden lived in the main house, a redstone thing lifted off a Carolina plantation blueprint, complete with porch pillars and a polished brass bell to call in the boys for dinner. But Juniper wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at the outhouses, the tool shed, the farrier's lean-to. Because men let their guard down in ugly places. No one guarded the ash pile. They crept in from the east, past the hog pens and the orchard. Juniper wore a scarf over her face and a slouch hat tilted low. Calder had stripped his coat and dusted his clothes in limestone to dull the color. They looked like drifters. That was the idea. They reached the outer fence before noon and watched from the shade of a cottonwood grove. She saw Mitch first. He was out back, laughing with 2 others, a jug in one hand and a bloodied branding iron in the other. There was a yearling bawling nearby, hobbled and wild-eyed. Mitch liked to brand things himself, always had. Juniper didn't flinch. "Not today," Calder said under his breath. "I know," she answered, but her fingers tightened on the rifle's grip. They waited another hour, watched the change in patrols. 2 riders came in from the south with dust trails behind them. One of them limped. The other had a stitched-up cheek and a sawed-off hanging loose under his coat. Calder pointed. "That's Cobb." Juniper's breath hitched. That coat, the hunch, the boots, something primal stirred behind her ribs. "I remember his voice," she said. "Smooth, like a preacher at a hanging." They didn't shoot, not yet. Instead, they watched where Cobb went, into the farrier's lean-to, then toward the main house. He spoke to no one, just walked with that same limp swagger rhythm, like his bones had never healed right after a war no one remembered anymore. Juniper marked every step, every gesture. She memorized the angles of approach, the blind spots near the root cellar, the stretch of open land between the bunkhouse and the eastern fence. When the sun began to dip, they turned back. "Tomorrow?" she asked. Calder shook his head. "Too soon, we need time." "For what?" "To pull the others." She stopped walking. "What others?" Calder didn't look at her, just kept on riding. "You think we're the only ones with blood to answer for," he said. They camped that night on the riverbank near Dry Ridge Crossing. The fire was small, hidden in a ring of stones. Calder brewed coffee, strong and bitter. Juniper leaned against her saddle, coat drawn tight, eyes tracking the stars. "How long you been building this?" she asked. "Since Ruth died," Calder said. That was the first time he'd spoken her name. "She was my wife, taught school down in Etta Hollow. Smart, soft-spoken. She caught Malden's men dragging a 14-year-old out of the feed store backroom, tried to stop them. Next morning, I found her in the well." Juniper closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." I'm not, Calder said. She wouldn't want pity, she'd want fire. They didn't speak again that night. By week's end, the others had come. First was Jonas Pike, blacksmith, thick-armed, with a burn scar across his jaw from when Mitch tried to teach him a lesson about resisting taxes owed to the McCraws. Jonas hadn't forgotten. He still kept the iron he was branded with, hanging above his forge like a goddamn trophy. Next was Cassie Harlan, widow. She ran the bakery in Cormorant Gulch, lost her son after he refused to work McCraw fence lines. He disappeared for 3 days, came back with no eyes. She brought her shotgun and 3 jars of black powder wrapped in flour sacks. Then came Two Bits. Nobody knew his real name, fast with a knife, faster with a lie. Said he owed Calder for pulling him out of a dry well 2 years ago. Said the McCraws shot his sister in the belly for smiling at the wrong man. Juniper watched each one arrive. She said little. But when she spoke, they listened. Something in her quiet told them she wasn't just along for the ride. She had seen the inside of the beast, and she remembered the taste of its teeth. They met in an abandoned barn east of the tracks. Calder laid out maps and sketches, guard patterns, supply runs, the bunkhouse schedule, where Cobb slept, where Mitch drank, where Malden kept the ledger he thought no one knew about. That's the target, Calder said, pointing to the safe. Everything they've done is in there, names, routes, bribes. If we get it out, even the marshal in Durston can't ignore it. They'll never let us close, Cassie said. Juniper nodded. Then we don't go in through the front. She pointed to the service shed. They don't lock it. I saw Cobb go in without a key. There's a crawl space beneath it, small enough to slip a person through to the foundation if we come in from underneath. They won't see it coming, Two Bits grinned. No, Juniper said, they won't. It began 2 nights later. Jonas set the first distraction, tipped a cart of flammables near the outer fences, lit it, and let the fire spread. As riders rushed to douse it, Juniper and Calder crawled through the drainage ditch toward the shed. She went first. The crawl space was narrow, lined with stone and mud. Her fingers bled on the rough brick. Her breath echoed loud in her ears. But she made it through, up into the shed, then out into the shadows behind the main house. Cassie met her there, passed her a cloth sack. Inside, tools, lamp oil, 2 jars of lye. Juniper didn't flinch. Get the ledger, Calder whispered, then signal. She nodded once, then slipped inside. She moved like a shadow, light on her feet, body close to the walls. The house was too big, too empty. The McCraws had grown arrogant. They never believed anyone would get this close. She reached Malden's office. The safe stood behind a painting of a longhorn skull. She cracked it open with tools Cassie had taught her to use in a bakery cellar, back when they were just women surviving. Inside were documents, letters, a book wrapped in oilskin. She took it all. Then she heard the sound. Boots 3 pairs, coming fast. She turned, heart hammering, and saw him. Cobb. He didn't speak, just drew his knife. But Juniper didn't freeze. She moved. She grabbed the lamp oil and flung it. Glass shattered, flames roared. Cobb screamed. Juniper ran. She didn't stop when she hit the ditch, didn't stop when she heard gunshots behind her, didn't stop until she was on her horse, ledger in hand, blood on her sleeve, smoke trailing behind her like a banner of war. Calder rode beside her, Jonas behind. Cassie whooped like a banshee. The barn burned by morning. Half the McCraws' ledgers gone. Cobb didn't die. But he burned. And Juniper. Juniper was just getting started. By morning the plains were whispering with smoke. The barn fire had lit more than timber, it had stirred the whole territory awake. McCraw riders were seen all over, scouring the roads, stopping wagons, questioning drunks, checking church basements. No marshal rode out. Not yet. Too many pockets lined with McCraw coin. But even paid silence had limits when the wind changed direction. Cobb survived. That much was clear. A stable hand in Cormorant said he'd seen a man with half his face swaddled in gauze carried out of the Redstone house. Said he didn't scream once. Just gripped Malden's coat with his burnt hand like it was the only thing holding him on this side of the dirt. Juniper wanted to be glad he lived. She was. Because death would have been clean. She didn't want clean. She wanted him to know it was her. They couldn't stay in town. Cassie and Jonas rode west. Two Bits vanished, said he had an errand in the gulch, likely a lie. Juniper and Calder circled north toward the old mine trail, keeping low, riding hard. They slept under willows, drank from stagnant creeks, ate what they could catch. Every night Calder read from the stolen ledger, page by page. It wasn't just names, it was debts, agreements. Half the county had their souls pinned to McCraw Inc. There were numbers beside each, amounts owed, interest charged, payments collected in kind. Children's names next to goods delivered, girls marked with initials. 4 of the entries were crossed out in red. Juniper read until she tasted bile. "You said this was proof," she said one night, her voice quieter than the fire crackle. "It is." "No, it's a graveyard." Calder didn't answer, just folded the ledger shut and watched the dark stretch out around them. They met the others again at a cabin near the pass. Jonas was stitching a bullet graze. Cassie had smoke in her hair and powder burns on her skirt. Two Bits was there too, but his eyes were colder than before. "They're paying bounty now," he said. $10 a name, 20 for mine." "Who's taking the jobs?" Calder asked. "Out-of-towners, drifters, a few former deputies. McCraw's put up posters in Durston and Plum Creek, say we're anarchists." "Liars," Cassie muttered. "No," Juniper said, "they're afraid." The decision came fast after that. They couldn't just wound anymore. They had to cut. The target was the freight line. Every week, McCraw goods were carted north to Sutter's Bluff, cattle, flour, arms, whiskey. But beneath the crates, hidden in false compartments, ran the real trade: opium, stolen payroll, trafficked girls. They would hit the train. Calder scouted the rails. Juniper rode into Sutter's disguised as a farm girl and bribed a telegraph boy for shipping manifests. Jonas and Cassie built the explosives. Two Bits mapped the schedule down to the minute. 3 days later, they made their stand in the canyon. It was narrow, high-walled, perfect. Jonas packed the dynamite into a culvert. When the train came around the bend, Juniper stepped onto the tracks with a kerosene lantern and her coat flared wide. It was a madwoman's silhouette. The engineer screamed. The brakes screamed louder. They never made it to the blast point. The train shuddered to a halt less than 50 feet from where Calder waited, rifle drawn. Juniper climbed the side, boots loud on the rungs, and kicked open the third boxcar. Inside, crates marked Mullihorn feed, but beneath them rows of iron cages. Chains, rag bundles. Girls. Alive. One of them couldn't be older than 10. Juniper dropped to her knees. "We've got them," she said through clenched teeth. "We've got them all." The aftermath was quick and ugly. Cassie walked 2 of the older girls to safety while Calder and Jonas buried the worst. They didn't leave the crates behind. They piled them, doused them in oil, and lit the whole car. Flames rolled skyward, black, choking smoke. It was a funeral, a reckoning. Then Juniper took the ledger and left. Alone. She rode for Malden's house before anyone could stop her. through back hills and dry creeks, straight into the lion's teeth. She made it to the orchard before dusk. The guards were doubled now. Lanterns burned along every fence, but she didn't come through the fence. She came through the storm drain. She crawled it once, knew its shape like a scar. She came up beneath the stable and waited until night. When the bells rang for supper, she moved, past the bunkhouse, past the garden where she'd once buried her own belt so they wouldn't use it to hang her. She slipped into the house like a shadow through rot. Malden was in the study, alone, ledger open, drink in hand. Juniper raised her pistol. "Look at me," she said. He did. His eyes went wide. "You," he whispered. "No, no, you." She shot him in the knee. He dropped like a sack of bones, screaming, clawing the floor. Juniper stepped over him, calm, measured. "You branded my brother," she said. "Called him a thief. You let Mitch gut him in front of me. You had Cobb hold me down." "You were nothing," Malden gasped. "No," she said. "I was the one you should have killed." She emptied the second shot into his throat, the last into his ledger. Then she walked out. The guards never saw her. By the time they found Malden's body, the study was ash and the safe cracked open. She left her name on the wall, carved in blood. Juniper. They would never forget it again. The fires burned for 2 more days. They said it was lightning that struck Malden's house, that something in the grain stores caught and fed the blaze, but no one in Calden Springs believed that. Not really. Not after the train. Not after the girls. Not after the way Mitch McCraw rode into town 3 days later, drunk and half-mad, screaming for blood with a preacher's fury and a butcher's grin. He had Cobb with him. Or what was left. Cobb's face was twisted now, melted into a single warped grimace, the skin drawn tight over bone where the fire had eaten him. He wore gloves to hide the grafts, but Juniper didn't need to see his hands to know they trembled when he walked. They posted up in the saloon, turned it into a fortress. Broke chairs, boarded windows. Mitch stank of sweat and whiskey and old powder. Said they'd find the bitch who did this and hang her where the town could watch her choke. He didn't know she was already there. Watching. Waiting. Calder didn't argue when she said she'd do it alone. Cassie offered to back her. Jonas said he'd sharpen the blade. 2 Bits just nodded, flicked his coin once and walked away. He knew they all did. This wasn't justice anymore. It was the end of a story only she could finish. So she walked in. Middle of the day, sun glaring off the windows. She wore her brother's old coat and the boots she'd taken off a dead McCraw rider last winter. Hair braided back, rifle slung over her shoulder. No mask. No mercy. The saloon doors groaned when they swung. Mitch stood from behind the bar like a bear rising from sleep. One eye red, the other wild. "Well," he said, smiling with yellow teeth, "the rat comes to the cat." Cobb was beside him, silent, breathing like a dying dog through scorched lungs. Juniper stepped in. "You remember the closet?" she asked. Mitch's smile dropped. "I remember a girl who screamed when I lit the iron. And I remember how your hand shook when Dobbs cocked his shotgun." He lunged. She fired once, clean through the gut. He dropped like the animal he was, screaming, clutching his belly, writhing in blood that poured like something freed from a well. Cobb came next, knife in hand, but slower now, weaker. His body betrayed him even as he rushed. Juniper didn't shoot him. She waited. Let him come close. Let him smell her again, the way he had in that dark room. Then she took his blade from his hand, drove it into his ribs. 1 inch at a time. He made no sound, just looked at her with eyes already clouded. "You die slow," she whispered, "because you made others die slower." She pulled the knife free, let him drop beside Mitch, who was still choking on his own blood. She turned and left. The town didn't stop her. No one moved. By dusk, the saloon was empty. Cobb and Mitch lay cold, their names already being erased from the stories the town told itself. Malden's fortune was gone. The freight lines were shut. The ledger, copied and mailed, sat in the lap of 3 county judges who suddenly found their silence expensive. Cassie rebuilt her bakery. Jonas opened a smithy on the far edge of town. 2 Bits disappeared again, his name whispered around the poker tables in towns that still remembered what happened when justice came in boots and a woman's eyes. And Calder. He left his shack and took up a stretch of land near Juniper's cabin, never said much, never needed to. Sometimes she saw him at dusk, standing on the ridge, watching the wind move through the grass like something alive. She didn't go to him. Not often. But when she did, they didn't speak about the past. Because some things were done. And some things lived only in scars. Juniper planted a tree above the ridge, wild plum, crooked, stubborn. It took root in hard soil. Every spring it bloomed. Small white flowers, quiet and defiant. Like a name carved in blood on a wall no one could paint over.